Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for coming. It is always an honor and a pleasure to talk to Hilton, no matter the occasion. But on a beautiful day like today, at the Brooklyn Book Fest, and I have to congratulate you, Best of Brooklyn Award, this year's honoree. Born and raised Brooklynite.
It was a shock, and but the thing that I said last night that I think we all have to remember is just how important the library is to people, young folks coming up. It was really my second home, and also how incredibly important librarians are. And docents in museums, docents, all of the people that volunteer or work for practically no money at all are there not just to direct you to where something is in the stacks, but they're there to become interested in your mind. And when they are, it's not a job, it's a vocation. And so I would talk to librarians, and they would lead you from one thing to another. And so please, hugely cherish your libraries and your librarians.
Thank you for that,
Yeah.
Hilton.
Yeah.
My goodness. I have the great pleasure of talking to you today, and I sort of made this unilateral decision, and Hilton graciously agreed with me that what I wanted to talk about is Hilton's most recent book, My Pinup, A Paean to Prince, and not just because I adore this book, I adore this piece of writing, but also you and I have had many casual conversations about music.
Yes.
And about your love of music, my love of music. We send each other tracks, but we've never actually sat down and talked about what music means to you as a writer, what music, how it's sort of atomized, not only throughout your prose, but in your approach to language and so forth. So I have questions, I have passages I want you to read, and also we'll be opening it up for questions along those lines or any others. So, but to begin with Prince, well, actually to precede Prince, although it feels like nothing does, no one does. Do you remember the first music figure who made a huge impression on your sort of consciousness?
Yes.
Who was it?
James Brown.
Wow.
And my family, I would go with my cousin and another, I can't remember what other family member, but we were kids and we would sneak. This is my memory of it, was that we would sneak to, can you say snuck? We snucked.
I know,
we sneaked off to, New Yorker coffee editor would say, we sneaked off to the Apollo. And I don't think I was more than a boy, but I remember so well the moment where he would, they would put the cape on him.
Oh, God.
And then he would throw the cape off and have like another tremor of soulfulness. And the thing that made such a powerful impression on me was that he was what you would say non-binary now, but I couldn't distinguish between him being a man and a woman, and I couldn't distinguish between his affect and what he felt. Like, it was a confusion, a beautiful confusion of many, many things I didn't know about at that time. And one of the things that he did was that he transcended his own body to bring you something about what the great performers do, is that they really want to sort of reach the person that's all the way in the back. And that one person, and I felt in that instance that he was not only talking to me, but making me understand that there were all these things inside of me as well. So he was always a great figure for me, and also a great source of embarrassment at the same time. Because like he and Little Richard were telling me that I wasn't a straight person, that I was responding to this beautiful confusion of male and female energy that had no gender. It had everything to do with the purity of expression. So what they did was they helped me understand that writers, it's silly to say this, but one of the things, for instance, about Hemingway's machismo or whomever, is that it really is a performance that most writers, I think, can inhabit any gender in order to tell the story. So performers really helped me understand that much more quickly than writers. So was James Brown.
Let's actually segue. I'm going to ask you to read a passage
Sure.
from my pinup. I've marked it, if you want to start here. It's along the lines of what you were just talking
Sure.
about. So I marked the start there, and we'll read to the end of the chapter. It's probably like 5 minutes.
Okay, to here?
To here.
Okay, great, that's fine.
Thank you.
For the most part, I wasn't interested in the prince who produced 1999 and Purple Rain and Around the World in a Day, and at least half of Sign of the Times, all released between 1982 and 1987. Those felt like self-consciously, quote-unquote, white pop albums to me, a craven desire on the artist's part to belong to the world outside the colored queens I had known growing up, who called Prince Miss. Why did he want to leave us for that non-world of convention he seemed to aspire to, where, quote-unquote, she got married to a woman who looked like her, then, to make matters worse, dressed as Miles Davis had while on tour, promoting his rock jazz fusion album, Bitches Brew. Why did he want to betray the colored queer in himself? At parties in New York, uptown and down, I stopped dancing when the frat boys pumped their fists in the air to 1999, or slid across the floor when Kiss came on, or grabbed their obliging girlfriends, girls unlike the fierce dykes who sang and played backup for Prince in his early years, and twirled them around to Raspberry Beret. They didn't know what he meant by any of it, but his queers did, and yet I no longer mattered. What mattered was Prince's acquisition of a larger audience, those people who purchased records and filled concert halls, not the black queens who lip-synced to Sister while voguing near the Hudson River in the clear light of night. But in 1988, Prince redeemed himself somewhat. That year, he released Love Sexy. The record made things different again. It was as if Lazarus had risen from some strange, frat boy-populated cave. The cover told us everything. It was Prince, naked, his hair feathered, one hand shielding a beautiful nipple. A beautiful nipple, that's so nice. I didn't realize I'd written that. Thank you, Jennifer.
You're very welcome.
Shielding a beautiful nipple. The album featured another female doppelganger, Kat, a dancer and singer who looked like Prince insofar as anyone could look like Prince. She was spectacular in ways that Prince felt he had to own during his Purple Rain reign. You could see it in the music videos. He performed, but Kat worked. But he was still too much the showman and the boss man not to upstage her. Kat was beautiful. She had a big ass. She posed on the Thunderbird that Prince and his cohort partied on at the end of the show. With her long curly hair and well-toned biceps, Kat was the girl Prince had been before he stopped being a girl, outrageous and demanding. She rapped to the audience. She got right in our collective face. You could see her eyeliner. Prince smiled behind his guitar, behind his own shimmering ass, as Kat became him and sang his lyrics, a twinning for the ages. Kat was not only Prince, she was Cynthia and Rosie from Sly's Family Stone, Betty Davis without Miles. I longed for that twinning. I longed to be the Prince to someone's Kat, and the other way around, too, like a figure in a platonic dialogue. I had always longed to meet my other half, my Prince half, and then another, and then another, just as Prince was always himself, and then another, and then someone else. If Prince had his twin, why couldn't I? But twinship did not come easily. In time, I would find my Prince, but when I did, it was complicated. He wanted Dorothy Parker, but there was only one. Yeah, thank you. You had mentioned earlier when we were starting to talk about music, those various influences, and I think it's important for us to talk about Dionne Warwick.
Oh, please.
And just the other day, I was having lunch with a friend, and I said, if you listen to Trains and Boats and Planes, I'm a plagiarist, really, that one of the things that Hal Davis and Burt Bacharach did was to introduce a kind of philosophical strain into pop music. And what Dionne Warwick was so brilliant at was, I think, literally and figuratively breathing life into philosophy about life. So the line, I think, goes, trains and boats and planes, they mean a trip to Paris or Rome, but not for me. And so the second or third line to many of their songs had everything to do with the ways in which people separated or came back together, but often it was a search for something. So I think that writing for me is often a search for something.
Search for something. And one thing that I know, people talk about Dionne Warwick, and it took me a long time to wrap my head around this as a voice, as an interpreter. And there are analogies to be made with writers, I think, as well. And apparently, Bacharach's music was incredibly challenging to sing.
She said the toughest thing was breathing.
Right, right. Like she couldn't even find a breath, and yet she always did it in this pristine way. Can you articulate what it was that she was able to find in there? I've never actually heard anybody. I mean, there is the consensus that Dionne Warwick is genius on that music.
Yes.
But I've never heard the articulation of exactly why. That's just my dorky question. I figure if anybody knows, it would be you.
I think it's if you watch a great actress or a great singer, you're watching someone giving themselves over to the material and at the same time remaking the material. The reason that actors can be disturbing to writers in the beginning of a rehearsal is that they have to make the script their own. And so what the writer has felt or dreamt about on the page has to become they have to own the material in order to give themselves over to it. There's that wonderful story of, I think it was Tennessee Williams, and it was the first reading of Sweet Bird of Youth. And Geraldine Page was playing Alexandra Delago. And at some point he stood up and he started screaming, "I can't stand it," and ran out of the theater. And it was because she had to become the character, not as he imagined it, but as she imagined it. So I think Dionne Warwick's great stylistic and emotional innovation was to give herself over to philosophy as a singer. I mean, that was an amazing innovation. It wasn't soul singing, it wasn't gospel, it wasn't standard pop music. She had to give herself over to kind of philosophical quests as these characters invented by David and Bacharach.
Do you think that she inhabited character when she sang? Do you hear that?
I don't think there's any performer who doesn't know,
Yeah.
who doesn't do that. I mean, that's partly what makes it so exhausting, right? Is that you are and you aren't yourself.
There's somebody else that you've written about a number of times and that you and I talk about is Shaka Khan.
Yes.
Like the greatest. Yay.
Yeah.
And I actually dug out some early writing to read you on Shaka Khan. And I guess I want to start, all right, I'll paint a picture for the audience. It's 1988, you're at the Village Voice.
Oh my gosh.
And you're tasked with writing the review, or maybe you pitched it, you'll have to tell the story, about CK.
Yes.
And you didn't like that record.
No, but it was one of the great events of my life.
So I want to hear the story.
So at The Voice, it was very strange. There were amazing people, Doug Simmons, Bob Christgau. These were the editors, and Bob Christgau was a brilliant editor and writer about music. And I always felt that it was a kind of weirdly segregated section of the paper, that there were amazing people like Greg Tate who were writing there, but these were all kind of hetero guys, and they would go out drinking together and hear music, and I felt a little bit like, hey, what about me?
Right.
Sort of, a little bit. And so one of my favorite things in life is to destabilize straight men. It just gives me deep pleasure.
Oh, and they make it so easy.
It gives me deep, lasting gratification. If you for instance, if you treat a straight man as an object and say, you know, he's cute or whatever, that you can watch them unravel so quickly because they're the ones doing it, right?
Right.
But if you do it to them, so to speak, it's a big confusion of energy. So similarly on the page, I like to do that as well. And Bob Christgau is a brilliant person, and I asked if I could review the album, but it felt like it felt pornographic, the album, what the producers had done to her. And so could I write it as a porn story? This is The Village Voice. And it was a great paper. And he said, sure, try it. And so it was sort of like, you know, the black tape that used to be on porn pictures, like on nipples in particular. And so they did this layout, and the art director said, oh, we can put black tape on where you would put the words. It was great fun. So I wrote this piece, and one day I was sitting at my desk and the phone rang, and it was this woman, and her voice was really familiar, and she was going on about, she didn't even understand what the fuck I was writing about, and who the fuck was I, and this and that, and FFF, and this and that. And I said, what's your name? And she said, doesn't matter. And I said, what's your name? She said, Antoinette, which is Shaka's birth name. And I said, wow, Chaka Khan's really mad at me right now. And it was it was so worth the agony of writing to get her to be angry that I was devoted to her forever after.
Why her anger? Or what would have made it? Was that just
well, you know,
it's right.
I mean, writing, you don't. With writing, it's a different thing. You're not having a sort of immediate response the way that a person stands on stage and has an immediate response to their work. With writing, you're doing something that is pretty internal, and it's going out there to people whom you don't know particularly, if at all. So to have such a big star respond was really, and in this very visceral way, was really profound. Yeah.
There's a beautiful passage in my Pinup where you're backstage with Prince, and he is doing what Prince does, which is at first ignoring you, maybe offering you some food or like
some
go get it
water,
yourself, some water. And then you sit on a couch and you have to kind of wait for him to join you. And then things seem to warm up. And the sort of high point, it seems for Prince, maybe not for you, is he gets this great idea that you should collaborate.
Yes.
On a book.
Yes.
About him.
Yes.
And you decline.
Yes.
And you have ambivalence about, I just wanted to revisit that sort of, that moment of being in front of, you know, Chaka Khan or Prince, or, I mean, there are other people you've written about where there will be this moment, I'll call it ambivalence.
Yes.
Where you have to kind of push them aside for a second, or for good.
Well, you have to become yourself.
Right.
And so one of the things that, so what happened was that I left, we were in St. Louis, going to Nashville the next day, and I left the dressing room. I went to the show, which was brilliant, and I was leaving the backstage area, and this woman was saying, Mr. Hilton. And I turned around, and it was one of his people. And she said, Prince would have killed me if I didn't find you. Oh. And I said, oh. We can die now. She said, Prince would have killed me if I didn't find you. He wants to see you. And I went, he was in his makeup trailer, and he was so extraordinarily beautiful that any light was his, key light. And he was putting on, his makeup artist is putting on new eyelashes. And he said, no, number 14, he said.
Oh, he knew the eyelash number.
It was like a map of eyelashes. And he knew where Dakota was. And and he turned and he said, "Hey, just come." You know, Larry Graham was in the band at that time, and I was having an epiphany. He said, "And would you come? You know, be with us?" And so it was. It was like less than an hour after this massive concert, and he was completely calm. He was completely collected. He was present, and it was he wanted me to live there and in Paisley Park and help him write his autobiography. Now, this is an enormously beautiful opportunity to be with Mozart, really, right? But I knew that if I lived there, he had every right to call me at 3 in the morning whenever he was ready to work, and that I wouldn't have any time for my own work because I would be on tenterhooks the whole time. When do I interview him? When do we talk? And then the writing wouldn't be mine, it would be his.
Right.
And so it would be a kind of weird ventriloquism. And I couldn't do it.
Right.
And I then wrote him a letter of apology, but he didn't respond. I think that he was just not used to people saying no.
Right. You preface in the book, there's this beautiful, and you do this so deftly. There's a moment when you're in the dressing room, and Maceo Parker and a second musician whose name just fell out of my face, it fell out of my head and face, walks in, and they've worked on an instrumental or something that they want to present to him, and they play it for him, and he says no.
Right.
And I think it's your way as a writer of sort of, we now understand Prince is not a collaborator. And the diva,
Right.
is the diva ever a collaborator? I'm talking sort of music figures. I mean, James
Well, that's
Brown,
that's a
Shaka,
good
you know.
question. I think it really extends to their personal life as well, right? Do they know how to connect on that level? I think that people have asked me about his sex life, which I don't know anything about, but I said I would wager that his sex life was on stage, that what you saw was the energy. You don't have that kind of energy and imagination just about performance. It's your writing. Right. And so since writing and sexual energy are really one thing, I think that he was a universe unto himself, and that he might have felt, I remember asking him about when he was making films, and he was very sort of perturbed. He said, because you couldn't do your own thing. And I think all of those things were sort of signals to me that he wouldn't be able to work like that. Right. It wouldn't be my writing.
Right.
And as much as I adored him, that would be a job for hire, and it would take me away from my own work for a long time.
For a very long time,
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yeah.
How did, sort of thinking more broadly about music and you as a young writer and taking on that subject, and also taking on that subject in very particular ways. One of the things I marveled sort of reading back over a lot of what you've read, or what you've written, is you give music this place, of course, the oral, but you also put it in the body, and you always have.
Yes.
And you put it into not just desire and this sort of otherness, but like the fact of a body sort of comes through when you're listening to Prince, or when you're on a dance floor, or Shaka Khan even, you know. That's not usually how music gets written about necessarily, or that's something I feel like you're quite singular at. And I wonder if you had more to talk about, I mean, either as audience for music or...
Well, it's not a thing that is separate or away from the room that you're in, right? The room that you're in, where there's music or where there's sound or any kind of oral information is happening. It's affecting you as much as it's affecting you as much as the things that you can't hear. I have to mention someone that we saw together perform. Is Jessica Lange here? Did she make it? There she is. Hello, sweetheart. She's a great actress. You all know that. And but one of the things, Jennifer and I saw Jessica in Long Day's Journey into Night, and the way that Jessica played the role was her back was to the audience, and she was relying on her voice to tell the story. And then she would turn and she would turn back. And one of the things that was so extraordinary about the performance was all the things that she was listening for. She was listening for recrimination from her husband and her children, and she's listening to the things that she can't hear in the room. When you write about music or anything like that, you have to listen to what's not happening. You're listening to your own feelings, you're listening to your own guilt, the way that Jessica's character, Mary, is listening to her own guilt, right? And so you're listening to all these different kind of speeds and radio frequencies at the same time. And so I think that for me, writing is often about listening to what is there and what's not there simultaneously. So there's a friend of mine, and I sent her a suggestion for, she's an actress, and I sent her a suggestion. She said, oh, I've been wanting to do less words. How did you know that? And I said, well, I've been listening to you. I've been listening to what wasn't possible for you. Mm-hmm. And so I think that with people, that writing is really about listening to the things that are not there, mm-hmm. that you know are there. I'm not talking about it as kind of as a medium. I'm talking about it as an awareness of the space that you're in. So my listening really began with my sisters, and my sisters would be getting done up for a Saturday or Friday night, and we had a little portable record player, and there were these things that was called Scepter Records. I remember the shape was this sort of black label, and it had a fat thing that you would put on the thing for the records to stack. And Dionne Warwick and a number of people, and I remember that the sound of the record wasn't divisible from what they were saying and doing. So for me, that was the early training of how to observe and hear at the same time.
And when you are, you have written, you've written profiles on Chaka Khan, Prince, mm-hmm. and so forth. And when you are, in that mode, following someone around, sort of immersing yourself in their life, I'm wondering how, I've talked about you before as a kind of portrait artist, mm-hmm. in a way. There's more to say about that. So are we almost talking about the sort of light shadow values or presence absence
yes.
values? And how did you come to be able to do that? Is that something that you obviously naturally took to? You can point to a moment in childhood, but were there also writers or editors or people who sort of helped guide you to be able to do, because it's a very precise art form, really, writing about someone.
Well, I think there's such a thing as talent.
I do, I do too, but we couldn't rest there.
Which you can't really explain.
I thought that went just unsaid. I thought we knew that at the top.
I think I think that for me, it's such an opportunity. Language is such an opportunity, not to get things right, but to chart an experience or to describe an experience. There's so much that remains unsaid in our lives when we try to connect with people that we love or don't love. But the writing is an opportunity for us to describe what that passage of time is like. What is it like to connect to Jennifer and to be in this room together? That's an opportunity to describe something. So I think that for me, the writers that I loved growing up, we were talking about this a little bit earlier were Brooklyn-based writers who could give me an aware or language or a sense of where I was, where we were in the borough, where my street was. So a huge influence is a woman named Paul Marshall. She wrote a great book called Brown Girl, Brownstones, about sort of community that my family was from, West Indian community that bought property in Crown Heights and so on. And after the war, there was Betty Smith, who wrote A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. I read it over and over again. And again, writing is not really gender specific. So I'm reading this book about a young girl Irish girl in Williamsburg. And that has everything to do with me and nothing to do with me at the same time. I think I want to stress that because we're living in an age where these definitions are important to people and I understand it. But I also don't want us to forget the immense freedom of the imagination.
Right. You talk about, I'm thinking now of actually the piece I was referring to earlier that you wrote about Shaka Khan in The Village Voice.
Uh-huh.
And you end that piece, it is unbeknownst to the reader at the top, and then later, that you end that piece remembering the friend who introduced you to the music. Mm-hmm. And you do this beautiful move there that I think, that I know shows up in Prince again, where you atomize the music in a kind of memorial way. Mm-hmm. That writing becomes a kind of memorial always.
And to remember.
And a way to remember. And
excuse me.
do you want to read? I pulled a passage.
Sure.
Do you mind reading?
Sure.
It's beautiful. These are the last few paragraphs, as I mentioned, of Hilton's piece on, it's a review of CK.
I have not seen this in 30 years. So just give me 1 second.
You bet. I know, this is your life to you. But,
amazing.
yeah.
Betty Davis is going to come out in a second. Once I had this friend that I made when I was 13. His name was Jay, and he died not too long ago. He was a fat boy with a fairy's love of show tunes and negresses who could sing. Jay often came into the city by himself. We lived in Brooklyn. He came into the city to go to Christopher Street to feel apparently loved and funny. He would let men. So when I have a pause, it's just the pornographic, we take the word out. I guess this is kind of pre-erasure poetry. He would let men, him in the, Jay did not know because he was essentially apolitical, untutored, trusting that the symptoms of his private illness might lead him to a very public one. Anyway, he never went into detail about these things he did. Even though I laughed at him because he had identified me for what I was, I still had quote-unquote normalcy on my side as a power. He lived with his mother. Sometimes we would close the door and he would show me magazines of men doing what Jay and I never did with each other because he considered me beautiful and I did not. Sometimes he would say, listen to this, and I would. More often than not, it was Shaka Khan or something from Bubbling Brown Sugar. I think of him often now because he is no longer with us here in the land of the sick. Listening to Shaka Khan now and having someone write about it might make him disapprove, but he's left me behind, and it's a different story now entirely. It's hard to make anything up, real or imagined. Sometimes in my sleep I think, seeing or listening to things in the way that I do now will not be this way forever and forever and forever. But then again, that's what they call dreaming.
Thank you.
Wow.
No, I ambushed you a little with that.
No. I just can't believe I was that intelligent once. Wow. Yeah.
But we talk about writing as a way of remembering, too. I mean, just casually we talk about this. And I don't want to spoiler my pinup, but you don't end with Prince.
No.
Or you end with his atomization into somebody you love and are saying goodbye to.
Yes.
And I don't even know what my question is around that. It was just such a striking, it just struck me as so beautiful to be able to take this figure, this enormous figure, Prince, and allow him to be other people too, or allow other people to take his luminosity for a moment? I mean, how did you think about it, or how did it sort of?
I think that was based on having observed a lot of people performing, and that they're not one person. And so their job, I'm telling Jessica like she needs to hear this shit, but there's they have to have almost a kind of superhuman energy level and force in order to do the project. So that's why years can go between performing, because you have to kind of restore your body. As Montgomery Clift says, your body doesn't know you're acting. And it's the reality of that feeling that I try very hard to bring to my writing. I call myself a kind of Stanislavski writer, that I have to really sort of, in order to recreate the moment on the page, I have to recreate it emotionally to understand what I'm doing.
And when you recreate it, are you literally physically feeling those emotions or those moments?
Or I'll do a little bit of an exercise that I learned as when I was at Performing Arts. I took a lot of the lessons that I learned at that school for writing, and one was just to do sort of little sensory exercises that would really help me to try to understand the subject. So when I was writing about Dorothy Dean and the women, I wanted to understand her crankiness, and I realized she was hungover most of the time. And so I spent a couple of days with a hangover, and how your patience is very short, and you're poisoned, right, from the alcohol. So I wanted to understand what that experience was like. Why didn't she have any patience? Why? And when I hit on the physical aspect of it, I was able to understand her. When I was reviewing theater, one of the things that it taught me was really how to listen even more closely and to observe what the performer was doing in this space, but also what they were saying, what were the nuances of the script, how had they made the writing their own, how had they embodied this writing. So a wonderful performance I'll never forget was John Lithgow in Delicate Balance. And her line was something about basically she had castrated him in some way, she says. And he didn't play it as a wounded person throughout his body, but he played it as a person that you could wound. That's two different things, right? That he was expecting. He didn't know what to expect, but he expected the wound. And that's a different way of dealing with the script. So that's the kind of writing that I tried to do, which is to bring that visceral energy to the page.
Do you feel that there are different levels and frequencies authorially that are, like Lithgow, the example that you just gave, he's making that choice between being wounded and being someone who could. Do you feel as an author that you can sort of put on that armor, take it off in moments?
Nah.
No?
I think it's always that you're
there.
vulnerable and that you're always, otherwise you're not really doing the writing. And writing is a kind of act of consciousness, and how do you turn your mind off? You don't turn your mind off, so you can't turn your heart off either.
Right.
Some people many writers find different ways, because it's an incredibly innovating thing, and we've all read about them, right? But I think taking the lesson from Montgomery Clift, it's very important to maintain a kind of safeguard, too, that you're not giving yourself over to it 24/7. And if you're giving yourself over to it 24/7, how do you protect yourself, too?
Right.
Yeah.
How do you? Can I ask?
Friends, very important. Quiet, just quiet, yeah.
The solitude.
Yeah. I mean, that's the terrible thing about writing is that it requires a certain kind of isolation. It's not fair to other people. And I've never understood how to. I think it's one of the things that writers spend their lives trying to understand is how not to make people feel less because of it. It has nothing to do with other people.
And I just want to note there's a beautiful, I don't know if I'd say irony, but in a writer whose life is so, requires a certain amount of solitude, to then stand in front of someone like Prince or someone like Shaka Khan and have to wrap one's head around the public side of being an artist. I mean, one question.
Well, that's the unfortunate part about those particular people, and Shaka Khan's very open about this, but, you know, the drug use is something that really is a chemical way of having that happen. And I don't think it's such a kind of, in a way, it's not really metaphysical. It's actually, I need this to turn off that. But it's it's affecting a lot of other people, and it's affecting you. So that's the road that they took. And thank God she's lived to tell the story about it. But I think, don't do it. Just don't do it. It's just really not worth it. It's because it's a temporary thing.
Right.
And you have to, I'm really an enemy of repetition. I don't like doing the same thing every day, so I cannot be a drug addict. It's just the most boring thing in the world. Like, you have to get the thing and do the thing. So I'm just not really interested in that stuff.
Just a pattern.
Yeah.
There was, you sent me, and this is a total non sequitur and will in no way gracefully segue us into questions, which we will do, but a couple of years ago you sent me an interview with Shaka Khan. Linnell did an interview with Shaka Khan. It's on YouTube. You can find it. It's one of my favorite interviews with her. But she says this very beautiful and very haunting thing about Prince. Prince had just died,
That's
I don't
right.
know, a year ago. Do you want to tell that story?
Yes, she said, it broke my heart. She said, I'm a drug addict. And I could not tell that he was using. And I think it's the power of his performance as Prince that kept people out, ultimately. And so we all have to rely on someone, and we all have to love someone. And it's very important that we are ultimately vulnerable to someone. And that can be a terrible burden, and it can be a gift at the same time, but there's no other way out of it alive. You have to make yourself vulnerable to at least one person, and I don't think he did. And I think that that's what she's responding to, that she wished that she had been there for him as a fellow addict, but also as a fellow performer who understood that energy can be overwhelming. So bless him and keep him, and I hope truly that he's found someone to talk to about who he is.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have time for questions. I'm assuming the microphone in the middle of the room is for questions? People who want to just get up and ask? Please do.
Don't feel obliged.
Or you can just shout from
Don't
wherever
be
you
shy.
are.
I think they're getting to the next event, actually.
Oh.
Hi.
Hi. Going back to how you were talking about the visceral experience of writing, I'd love to hear you talk about critics living and dead, and like the ones who you go to for that kind of visceral sensation, and the ones that you go to in terms of not them particularly as stylists, but as thinkers primarily.
Oh, sure. Wonderful question. It's a great opportunity to thank people. So there's a great underread dance critic named Edwin Denby, who was also a poet. He's essential to our understanding of the critic as personality, To go further back, there's Baudelaire was very important to me in terms of establishing a view of a city and how the city became the subject for the critic. Of course, there's the great Pauline Kael, whose messiness was so inspiring and liberating because she couldn't contain the feeling. I think she was a wonderful writer. Greg Tate, extraordinary music critic. Gosh. Oh, Elizabeth Hardwick, super important in terms of understanding women and literature in particular, but also, as Joyce Carol Oates said about her, her essays have plots, so she was telling a story all the time through criticism. There are many, many ways to write essays, and I think the most important way to do it is to do it the way that you want to do it. And these people taught me that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, I just want to say, Jessica's signing book. What time is your signing? I don't know. So Jessica Lang has a great book of photographs. You guys should buy them, buy it. And she's going to do a signing. Where is it, Jessica?
At Powerhouse, where I'm following them.
Okay, Powerhouse Books? Right, next to the North Stage. Okay, so she's next to the North Stage, Powerhouse Books. It's a great book. It's about loneliness and about New York City, and you'll learn a lot looking at it. Thank you so much. Yes.
Beautiful intro.
Oh, go ahead, Jessica. Oh, thank you, Jessica. Hi.
Hello. I had a question about process for you. Listening to you narrate other folks' books and hearing the rhythm of your reading and the way that you deliver, I wonder, when you are writing, do you mean for it to be read aloud, or with your process, do you read aloud as you're writing, or does it live on the page and you give it all of the intonation and parentheses or any kind of punctuation? How does your voice get into the page?
I think that's really just that's the only habit I have is writing, and it's every day. So you begin with just being lousy, usually, and it's all this space that you don't understand that you know that you have to fill. So if I had a line, it was lovely meeting you last night, for instance, and when you were on stage, I would say, and then the young man walked away from the lectern, and I would write that. And then I said, yeah, but there was a lot of other stuff going on in his mind or on the stage. That's going to be tomorrow. I'm going to make this less lousy tomorrow. That's really what you're thinking, and less pedestrian tomorrow. So it's tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow that you're really hoping for. It's alchemy. I don't really know how to explain it, but I can hear it when it's false.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
We have time for one more if someone has one, but if not.
Go get Jessica's book. I'm telling you, it's really good. Thank you.
all.
Thank you.